20 years ago, Warwick and Juliet Hanson launched New Zealand Performance Horses. This was to diversify their beef and sheep farming enterprise, as it was an industry they knew really well and could see huge opportunities for improvement. So, let's go and hear their story.
Well, Hartpury goes back in the Gordon family to 1860, when the family arrived out from England and they landed in a boat at Clifton, which is near Napier. It was one big block, and then over the years it got split into four. So it was Clifton and Summerley, which it has changed its name to Cape Kidnappers, and Tarapa and Hartpury. My grandfather grew up at Tarapa, then due to family deaths and things like that, that he moved then eventually to Hartpury. My grandparents, they just had the one daughter, which was my mother. She was a very keen horsewoman and farm girl and grew up here. Then my father, who was also farming on family farms, he grew up in Hawke's Bay, and then they got married, and then he sold his farm and then bought a farm near here, just this one farm between, thinking that he would run this farm, Hartpury. And then in 1980 he was killed in a plane crash. My mother decided then, I had two brothers and neither wanted to farm, so she said to Warwick and I that we should come and run the two farms as one block. Going back to the early days, how they drove their cars, and there used to be 14 gates from here to Havelock. And there was no big tuk-tuk bridge in those days, they had to cross the ford. When my great uncles were in town and were ready to leave home, instead of ringing up on a cell phone to say that they were coming back for lunch or what time they'd get home, they would take pigeons with them, and they'd let go the pigeon in town, and the pigeon of course would fly back, and they knew then roughly how long it would take them to get home. The stories of how they survived in those days, and they grew vegetables. They had a big vegetable patch down the bottom where they all grew all the vegetables for the station and the meat, and no or very few women ever drove in those days, so they used to just wait and rely on the men to take them to town on Friday nights. So it was a very sort of tough existence, and mainly survived on the food on the farm, and they had, you know, cows for milk and just the meat, and grew all their own vegetables. And the women spent all their time in their houses just doing all the work, 'cause they didn't have any washing machines and, you know, all the modcons we have today, so they spent the whole day just cleaning and cooking for the men.
You talked about women doing all the cooking and cleaning and men being out. Is it still the same?
No, it certainly has changed since then, and now of course never would anyone believe that for me, who owned the farm, was out as the shepherd and did all the jobs that you'd have a young boy do or staff do. Now we've got Hilary, our daughter, also taking over the farm, so women are very much role, and we've had women shepherds, girl shepherds on the farm, and even Warwick now, who comes home at night and whoever's first in the house starts cooking the dinner. So he does a huge amount of the cooking as well as I do, but then I'm doing a lot out on the farm, so the roles certainly have changed.
So after your dad died and your brothers said that they weren't keen to go farming, tell me about the challenge of you taking up those reins.
We arrived here and I was fairly young, and I think I was about sort of 26. It was a huge ask when we first arrived it was a big sort of old homestead at that stage. The farm was sort of fairly run down really. It had been run by managers for several years. I think when Warwick and I woke up, we were pretty excited about the whole business of running the farm, but by gosh, when the actual day came and we had to go to work, it was quite a big ask really. You know, the farm was like just very few paddocks, very little roading and very little like water. We had to do a huge amount to really get to where we've got. It's been a huge undertaking, and obviously with tough times and banks that probably really didn't get behind us enough to when things went wrong. But we did have a lot of businesses in the farming community that were very good, that had been good to my father, that came on board with us to help. The two of us just sort of boxed on and sort of got it to where we've got today. And then due to farming problems and debt, and we're wanting to move on for the next generation, our two daughters, and to leave the place with no debt if we can, and the horse business, we're now selling, or sold the homestead to David Kirk, who's part of our NCPH business, partner in it with Warwick. So we're going to do a little bit of a subdivision here around the homestead, and then I hope that'll clear our debt and move on and build ourselves another home. So it's ironic to think that the family in years ago started off at Clifton, then moved to Taurapa and built a home, and then they moved and built a home in the early 1900s on Hartbury, where my grandfather and my mother was born, and then they, when Mum was in her 20s, built this home, and then now we're still on the same bit of land but building just across.
Juliette's family have a long history with the farm. We talk about the changes they have had.
So do you have droughts most summers here?
No, we don't, and we've had a very good run really over the last few years when other areas of New Zealand have been so severely hit by droughts, especially the South Island, Canterbury. They've been so bad on the east coast, where we've been very fortunate here. We have had one year where we had a very bad weather bomb and lost 40% of Hartbury along the coast, which was horrific. So we had like a year's rainfall in like 24 to 30 hours, and the whole place, we couldn't move from the house. No buildings on the station were damaged, and it was incredible to think that way back in the early 1900s, where the family built the buildings and how much knowledge they would have known then, which was probably nothing to what we would know now, and how they put the houses where they did, and not one house was damaged, but the property was so badly damaged.
So when you say you lost land, was that like basically into the sea?
Well, down, not into the sea, but close to it, and like just hillsides, total hillsides gone, and fences and tracks, just horrific. Like the worst that Hartbury and the family have ever had since 1860. They've never had anything not even half as bad.
We're talking with Warwick about the origins of New Zealand performance horses.
I farmed as with my family farmer in Maraikako, west of here, until I was about 20. But my two brothers and I used to show jump, and we had a formidable team of show jumpers. We did it as amateurs, and we would go around the racetracks and buy all the cheap horses we could find, and then try and make them into show jumpers.
How did NZPH come about?
During the 89 drought, we had a farm consultant was brought in to help us with the farm, and he suggested that we needed to diversify, and was looking at things, and he came up with the idea, well, you're into equestrian, let's go and breed sport horses. And by that stage, New Zealand was lacking. Everybody we talked to was lacking in sport horses. He was going to France that year and on a wine conference. And during that period of time, he met up with, in France, with a lot of the people in wineries who were also into equestrian. It's very much a collective area, and got to know lots of people. So then the following year I went with him, and we went around all the horse studs and negotiated a deal.
So what did you need to do to get it set up here?
The hardest part was we were obviously bringing in the frozen semen, and the difficult part of that was there was no protocol at that stage to bring it in. So going through MAF to get the frozen semen into New Zealand was probably the most difficult part. And that is how I met my partner in the business now, and started off with is David Kirk.
So how did he get involved?
He was at that stage advising the Prime Minister, his chief advisor, and knew the Minister of Agriculture. And this consultant knew David, not really that well, but knew of him, and rang him up, and we rang David, and he got us a meeting with John Falloon, the Ministry of Agriculture, and that was the starting point.
What was it about this business that really appealed to him?
I think it was just an exciting new business that he hadn't seen before, and his wife Bridget is very much a farming person from Hawke's Bay, and with all his other businesses that he was dealing with, I think he just liked the rural thought of being something on a farm.
How did you get the business started? Did you need to go and find some staff?
Yes, we did need staff, but the real thing to get the business going was we had to go and find the mares, the breeding mares, and a lot of people have imported them, but that hasn't been successful. So we decided to go around the country and buy all the best show jumping mares we could find and buy in New Zealand.
I came over to New Zealand from England at the end of 2012 to work for Katie McVean, as she was then. And I groomed for her and rode at home, and then the opportunity arose to become more of a rider, which is where I wanted to go in Ep8, and so I came here.
So tell me about this place. You know, what do you do here and what goes on in a typical day, week?
A typical day, we ride the horses every day, so they get fed first thing, and then we start riding. Now we've got mainly young ones in, so 3 and 4 year olds, and so we utilise the beach and generally ride them down there, just basic schooling. We don't put too much pressure on them because they're so young. And during the show jumping season, it's quite a lot busier. We have more horses in work, and we do a lot more jumping around here and getting them ready for the show season and for the shows. At the moment, we've probably only got 10 horses in work plus about 8 breakers. During the season, we probably have about 25 in work. And we've got about 150 over the farm in total, so it's a pretty big thing. And we sell a lot to Australia, and we previously sold to Japan and America, so we're kind of spreading further afield, and to sell to Europe would be great. But we're getting better, bigger, and hopefully we just keep selling horses. Our breeding program, we have our own broodmare herd, which has about 30 mares in, and we get semen imported from Europe. Of some of the best in the world, so Cannon, Orlando, Quintus, to name a few. So we match them to the mares we feel would suit and go from there really. And each year we take in what we consider our between 3 and 5 best 3-year-olds, and we put them into our broodmare herd. And often they'll just have 1 or 2 foals and then come out and continue their career as a competition horse.
Are there any risks or issues with illness and things like that with the horses here?
We don't really have much illness, so to speak, going around. Obviously all of our horses run on the farm up until they come in for the training stage. That's very different to how they're treated in Europe. Generally in Europe they're boxed pretty much all the time, or in small turnout paddocks. Here so the foals, the yearlings, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, they are all turned out over the farm in huge paddocks. They probably as close as they can get to being wild. So we have the risks where a horse could get caught up in a fence, but to be honest, it rarely happens. We check the horses 3 times a week. Just give a drive around the farm, check the fences are all safe, check the horses are all okay. And I think that prevents a lot of the problems happening.
Tell me about the training at the different ages that horses get here.
So they come in generally as 3-year-olds to be broken in, and then we've got a breaker on site, so he breaks them in and gets them to the basic stages of schooling, and then they get turned back out again, and then they'll come back in sometimes later on in their 3-year-old year, and they do very basic work, generally down the beach, just getting them to go forward and learn that type of thing, and then maybe a small jump or 2 before they turn back out. 4-year-olds, they kind of come in and do the same sort of thing, but a little bit more pressure, a little bit more asking of them in the schooling and in the training area of that, and probably a little bit more jumping. We try and take them out. We've got some very good facilities nearby. You can take them to a different place and get them to see a different set of jumps and just jump them. We never jump them too big. And then when they come in for their 5-year-old year, that's when pressure's on and that's when they go out to the shows.
We're talking with Helen about the differences with training horses in Europe and New Zealand.
All of our horses are for sale. We sell a lot of 3 and 4-year-olds and a lot of 5-year-olds once people see them out at the shows.
What's the main differences between training horses here and say in Europe?
Well, here in particular we have obviously access to the beach, which is amazing for not only the young horses just training but their fitness as well. In Europe they don't have access to as much of that from what I ever saw. It was more just basically schooling in the arena and maybe hacking around tracks and stuff.
What attracted you to come here and take on this role?
Well, it's a pretty cool place to work. The scenery's not too bad. I just liked it. Again, I wanted to ride more and I like doing the young horses and seeing how they progress, so it's worked well.
What's the team that you've got here like?
Yeah, really good. At the moment we've got one groom that works on site, and she's been here a couple of years, so she knows how we work. And then we've got a home rider who helps me ride some of the horses that are in, and then the breaker. So yeah, we all work really well together, and it's working very well at the moment.
What are the important things to look for when you're trying to breed traits into horses?
Good brain. You know, you could have a horse that's got all the talent in the world, but if it's crazy, then you're not going to get very far. So yeah, good brain. Conformation's very good. That their legs are straight and everything's in proportion. If you've got a horse that's got badly turned in knees or feet or whatever, then you could have problems further down the line. So we, try and breed that out if we get any of it.
What's so special about training horses on beaches?
Yes, it's very good for their fitness, and you can just take them and get them going straight, which helps later on down the track. And we've got, I think, 6 kilometres of beach, so you can just keep going. We don't use all of it, but yeah, you can just keep going, and it's nice for the horses too. It stops them going. If you school them every day in the arena, they can go a little bit dull and get a bit bored of it and switch off, whereas you can take them out on the beach and it's wind in their hair and yeah, it's just a bit more fun for them.
Can you take them in the water?
Some of them do go in, some of them aren't so keen.
So having worked in the industry in the UK and then coming here, what are the main differences that you've noticed?
The main difference here is how the horses run. They're out in big paddocks, and I think that toughens them up for the future because they're not just on flat ground, they're on hills. It's not particularly steep, but parts could be. In Europe, I think the horse is a bit more wrapped in cotton wool. Here, for example, when it's the off season in the winter, we turn our competition horses out, and they're allowed to be horses for 4 months of the year, and I think that refreshes them and helps them come back better for the next season.
So what about on the people side of things? Is there many differences there?
I find in New Zealand a lot of the people that show jump do it more for a hobby rather than an actual professional business. I mean, we're kind of quite unique, and there's a couple of other places that are fairly similar, whereas in Europe every second place that you see will be a big riding stables with lots of different riders, and yeah.
Do you think that's to do with the money?
Oh yes, I definitely think there's a lot more money in Europe. It's a much more professional sport over there, and a lot more places and people to sell the horses to for a lot more money.
Do you think the sport in New Zealand is improving?
I think it is to an extent. I think there's a lot of good younger riders coming up. I think there's a few things that could probably be done within the sports to help these young riders get to reach their potential. I really love New Zealand. I've got no plans to go home, so hopefully I can stay here for the foreseeable future.
So how's the business going these days?
Yeah, going very good. It's a very strong business now because we're selling most of our horses by the time they're 5 or 6. So the costs have come down and the profits have gone up. We've also got my daughter Bridget, who rides for us in Australia, and she's at the top, and she takes the higher price horses at a higher level.
So how does the business operate in terms of like the ages of the horses as they progress through?
We start off by ranking them. We rank them always every year. We free jump them, which is put them into a small yard and have a small jump, and they just go and jump on their own till they've broken into 3-year-olds. Conformation is just the looks of the horse. It's big, its legs are straight, and it just looks a good horse, because people especially over in America and Australia, like good looking horses. Their ability to jump, so their technique is that they've got to be good in front. That means they tuck their front legs up when they jump, and they will kick their back legs as they go over the jump. That's a very important. And the third thing is their brain, which is to make sure they're quiet and easy to ride. Any horse that's hard to ride is hard to sell.
How do you build up your breeding numbers?
We were very fortunate the first few years to have 80% of our progeny were all fillies. So in the first 3 years, we took all the fillies into the broodmare herd. So then we had European blood in virtually all our mares straight off. And then slowly we have gone along, and as today we have only take 3 of the best in, so we were improving that breed all the time. The challenges is the distance from the really expensive market, which is obviously Europe, a distance. And the challenge is to get people to come to our place to buy horses. We still find that we need to have the horses either in Australia or at shows. But that's the challenge. But the positive side of that is China is going to be a huge show jumping market. The people in China, the wealthy in China, want to ride horses and want to compete. And China wants to win a gold medal at the Olympics in show jumping, just like Saudi Arabia has done, and they got a bronze medal in London. So we're closer to China than what Europeans. So that's a positive for us.
How are you going to tap into the Chinese opportunity?
Probably I'm going to get David Kirk to do that. His business skills will allow him to get in there and find the markets for us. And then I will probably follow. But we believe the Chinese are now going to Australia to watch show jumping, so we hope that they will see what we're doing.
What's the future going to hold for New Zealand equestrian sport?
The future is that Australia and New Zealand need to join up and be a lot closer in the sport and have a series. Over in Europe now, the big shows like, considering what we have here in New Zealand, the Horse of the Year, which they have is Aachen and Spruce Meadows, are going on a bit of a backward step. The new thing is GCT, more entertaining show for 3 hours. It's a bit like T20 cricket against 5-day cricket. And so they have 20 show series in Europe. New Zealand, we need to have a similar series, but in Australia and New Zealand, and we go across. And then the world's best, the buyers and that will start coming to New Zealand and Australia for those shows. And that's when the prize money will go up, sponsorship will go up, and the sport's got to grow from there. We need to grow the sport in New Zealand.
What's GCT?
GCT is Global Championships Tour. It's the top 30 ranked riders in the world get to go to a show, and at that show will be also an amateur class, and to go into that amateur class you have to buy a table for 50,000 euros which seats 10 people. So it's a swept up show, a bit like motorcar racing, Formula One racing. So the people who are paying the bills are the people who are amateur riders but who have the tables. It's the way of the future where it's a 3-hour competition, and it's held in under the Eiffel Tower in Paris, Monte Carlo on the beach, right in the middle of London, and of course, we might see one in Sydney.
So it's all about the spectators?
It's all about the spectators, yes.
We came here today to hear the story of New Zealand performance horses, and what we found was a farm that's been in this family for 7 generations. This was a traditional beef and sheep farm which is diversified to include New Zealand performance horses, and that will ensure that Warwick and Juliet have a sustainable business that they can leave for their future generations. We'll see you next time on Thinking Forward.